February 15th, 2026, 1452 local time, Gulf of Oman, 62 nautical miles southeast of Chabahar. USS Stout, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, is operating alone. Her mission, signals intelligence collection, monitoring Iranian naval communications, tracking radar emissions, building the electronic order of battle. It's quiet work, invisible, the kind of mission that never makes headlines. Until now. At 14:52:08, a missile emerges from the Iranian coast. Not a standard anti-ship weapon, something different. An anti-radiation missile, designed to home in on radar emissions, designed to blind the ship that sees everything. The Stout's AN/SPY-1D radar is the target, and the crew has 31 seconds to save it. Welcome to War Signal USA. I'm your host, and this is the story of how Iran tried to blind an American destroyer, and what happened when the U.S. Navy responded 16 minutes later. Let's start with context. By mid-2026, the electronic warfare dimension of the U.S.-Iran confrontation had become as important as the kinetic one. American ships and aircraft were constantly mapping Iranian capabilities, radar frequencies, communication patterns, command networks. Iran knew this, and they didn't like it. The USS Stout had been operating in the Gulf of Oman for 3 weeks. Her mission was classified, but her methods were well understood by Iranian intelligence. She was collecting data, building targeting packages, preparing the electronic battlefield for a conflict that both sides hoped would never come. On July 15th, Iranian state media released a statement condemning American electronic aggression and warning of decisive responses to continued surveillance operations. The Pentagon dismissed it as rhetoric, standard posturing. 2 days later, Iran made good on the threat. At 14:49, the Stout's electronic support measures, the sensors that detect enemy radar emissions, picked up an unusual signal from the Iranian coast, bearing 318, range, approximately 85 kilometers. The signal matched no known search radar. It was intermittent, pulsing. The electronic warfare operator logged it as unknown emitter, possible new system. 3 minutes later, the same bearing produced a different signal. This one was familiar. J-band frequency, high pulse repetition rate, active radar seeker. The signature matched a Hormuz 2 anti-radiation missile, an Iranian weapon based on the Chinese YJ-91. Range, 120 kilometers. Speed, Mach 2.8. Guidance, passive radar homing. Anti-radiation missiles are specialized weapons. They don't target the ship itself. They target the ship's radar emissions. The AN/SPY-1D, the heart of the Aegis combat system, broadcasts constantly. To an anti-radiation seeker, it's a lighthouse in the dark. The only defense is to turn off the radar. But without radar, the ship is blind. At 14:52:08, Combat Information Center confirmed the inbound threat. Single contact, bearing 318, speed Mach 2.6, descending. Time to impact 31 seconds. The tactical action officer faced an impossible choice. Option 1, shut down the AN/SPY-1D. Go dark. Deny the missile its guidance source. But without radar, the ship couldn't track other threats, couldn't engage, couldn't defend. Option 2, keep the radar active. Try to shoot down the missile. But that meant continuing to broadcast the very signal the missile was homing on. The TAO chose a third option, one that had never been tested in combat. Initiate MCON deceptive, SPI to low probability of intercept, NULCA deploy. MCON deceptive is an electronic warfare technique. Instead of simply turning off the radar, the ship rapidly shifts frequencies and reduces power output. The goal, confuse the missile's seeker without going completely blind. NULCA is an active decoy, a rocket-propelled device that hovers away from the ship and broadcasts a powerful radar signal, mimicking the AN/SPY-1D's emissions. If the missile is fooled, it will chase the decoy instead of the ship. At 14:52:19, the NULCA decoy launched from the starboard deck. It rocketed 400 meters from the ship, then stabilized, broadcasting a replica of the SPY-1D's signature at maximum power. Simultaneously, the actual radar shifted to low probability of intercept mode. Reduced power, frequency hopping, minimal emissions. The missile was now 18 seconds from impact. The Hormuz 2's seeker had a decision to make. 2 targets, one bright and stationary, the NULCA decoy, one dim and moving, the real ship. For 11 seconds, the missile tracked toward the decoy. Then it reacquired. At 14:52:35, the seeker locked onto the Stout's reduced radar emissions. The missile adjusted course, 7 seconds to impact. The Nolka had bought time, but not enough. The ship's phalanx CIWS engaged at maximum range. The 20mm gun fired 280 rounds in 3.1 seconds. 53 rounds struck the missile. But the Hormuz II is hardened against fragmentation. The warhead survived. At 14:52:42, the missile struck the Stout's forward superstructure, directly below the AN/SPY-1D radar arrays. The impact point was precise, exactly where an anti-radiation seeker would guide it. The 90-kilogram warhead detonated. The explosion didn't penetrate the radar arrays themselves. They're mounted high on the superstructure. But it destroyed the primary feed horn for arrays 1 and 2. It severed the waveguide connections to the transmitter room. It killed the AN/SPY-1D's forward hemisphere coverage instantly. The Stout's eyes were half blind. Worse, the explosion killed 4 sailors in the electronic warfare module directly below the impact point. They never had a chance to evacuate. 2 more sailors were critically wounded, shrapnel injuries, burns. The ship's captain, Commander Jennifer Walsh, reached the CIC within 90 seconds of the strike. What she found was controlled chaos. The damage control teams were already working. The fire from the impact had been contained within 3 minutes. The structural damage was survivable, but the radar was crippled. Arrays 1 and 2, covering the forward hemisphere, were offline. Arrays 3 and 4, covering the aft hemisphere, were operational. The ship could see behind itself, but it couldn't see what was coming from the direction of Iran. Commander Walsh understood immediately what this meant. The Stout was vulnerable. If Iran launched a follow-up attack from the same bearing, the ship would have almost no warning. She had 2 choices: turn the ship around, put the operational radar arrays facing the threat. But that meant presenting the stern, the least protected part of the ship, to any inbound weapons. Or run, get distance from the Iranian coast, buy time to assess the damage and call for support. Walsh chose neither. At 14:54:17, she gave an order that would become a case study at the Naval War College. Bring the ship to 270, all ahead flank. Weapons, prepare Tomahawk salvo on the launch site. We're not running. By turning to 270, due west, Walsh positioned the ship so its operational radar arrays could cover the eastern threat axis while the ship moved away from the coast. A compromise. Not ideal, but survivable. The launch site coordinates were already in the system. Intelligence had identified the Hormuz II battery 3 weeks earlier. It was located near the port of Chabahar, hidden among civilian infrastructure. At 14:56:23, Walsh received authorization from 5th Fleet Command. Weapons release approved. Engage the source. At 15:08:41, exactly 16 minutes after the missile struck, the Stout launched. 4 Tomahawk Block 4 cruise missiles emerged from the aft vertical launch cells. Flight time to target, 42 minutes. But the Tomahawks weren't the only response. From the USS Nimitz, operating 340 nautical miles to the southwest, an E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft was already en route. It would provide radar coverage for the Stout until her systems could be repaired. And from the same carrier, 8F/A 18E Super Hornets launched with a different mission: destroy Iran's coastal radar network that had guided the attack. The coordinated strike hit at 15:51. The Tomahawks struck Hormuz II battery first. The missiles approached from 4 different directions, a technique called time on target that ensures simultaneous impact. The battery's command vehicle, 2 launcher vehicles, and the associated radar were destroyed within 8 seconds of each other. Iranian personnel casualties, an estimated 12 killed. The Super Hornets followed, targeting 3 coastal surveillance radars that had provided tracking data for the attack. A GM-88 HARM missiles, American anti-radiation weapons, destroyed the radars before they could be relocated. By 1630, Iran's coastal surveillance capability in the Chabahar sector was eliminated. The Stout limped toward Oman, escorted by the destroyer USS Carney, which had been diverted from patrol duty. Her forward radar arrays were dead. Her electronic warfare suite was damaged. 4 of her crew were in body bags. Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Thompson, 27 years old, electronic warfare technician. He was at his console when the missile hit 6 feet above his head. Seaman Rachel Kim, 22 years old. Her first deployment ended 34 days in. Petty Officer 3rd Class David Okonkwo, 29 years old, 7 years in the Navy. 2 deployments to the Gulf. Fire Controlman 2nd Class James Chen, 24 years old. He was troubleshooting the CIWS when the blast threw him across the compartment. 4 names, 4 families notified. 4 reasons why electronic warfare isn't the bloodless domain some analysts pretend it is. The Stout underwent emergency repairs in Muscat, Oman, before being towed to Bahrain for full restoration. The repair took 5 months. New radar arrays, new waveguides, new electronic warfare equipment. She returned to service in December 2026. Commander Walsh received the Navy Cross for her actions that day. The Nulka decoy operators received commendations. Their quick action had reduced the missile's impact, even if it hadn't stopped it completely. The incident changed American electronic warfare doctrine in the Gulf. Within 2 weeks, all U.S. destroyers operating near Iranian waters were equipped with additional Nulka decoys. Radar emission protocols were revised. More frequency hopping, more random power variations, harder for anti-radiation seekers to track, and a new directive was issued. Ships conducting signals intelligence missions would no longer operate alone. Minimum 2 ship formations. Mutual radar coverage. The lesson was clear. In modern naval warfare, the radar that sees everything is also the radar that can be targeted. The same emissions that make Aegis ships so powerful also make them vulnerable. What other lessons emerge from the Stout incident? First, anti-radiation missiles changed the calculus. For decades, navies assumed that radar superiority meant battlefield superiority. The Hormuz II proved that radar can also be a vulnerability, a homing beacon for specialized weapons. Second, decoys save lives. The Nulka didn't stop the missile, but it bought 11 seconds. Those seconds allowed the ship to shift power, reduce its signature, and get the phalanx tracking. Without the decoy, the hit might have been worse. Third, partial capability is still capability. The Stout lost half her radar coverage, but half is not zero. Commander Walsh used what she had, turning the ship to maximize coverage from the working arrays. Adaptation under fire. And finally, electronic warfare has a body count. 4 sailors died in a radar attack. Not a torpedo, not a bomb. A weapon designed to blind sensors. But sensors are operated by people, and people die when missiles hit. 16 minutes. That's how long it took from impact to counterstrike. 16 minutes of damage assessment, command decisions, and weapons release. 16 minutes that demonstrated a fundamental truth. Blind an American warship, and America will blind you back. If this analysis gave you new perspective on electronic warfare, hit subscribe. We cover the tactics, technology, and truth behind modern military operations. Stay vigilant, stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.